Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Currently Speaking, the podcast of the Current Consulting Group. I'm Bill Current, president and founder of the Current Consulting Group. And once again, I'm joined by Brian Feely, senior vice president of the Current Consulting Group. Brian, good to have you back.
Thanks, Bill. Good to be here.
Now, this episode is one in a long series of podcasts that Brian and I are doing about oral fluid testing. So if you'd like to see any of the other episodes that have already been published, go to currentconsultinggroup.com. You can find them in our podcast archives. You can also find us on YouTube, Amazon Audible, Apple. We're on all the major podcast platforms. You can find us there as well. And we encourage you to like it, to share it, to help us build up our viewership by letting other people know about the great information that's available through this podcast. Now, as I mentioned, this is one in a series on oral fluid testing. We have several that we've done, and we have more that we're planning to do as well. This episode, we're going to talk about detecting marijuana in oral fluid and a little bit about the difference between smoked marijuana detection and edibles. And so, Brian, let's start off. So the basic question is, can marijuana be accurately measured in oral fluid? And how's the window of detection affected by the cutoff levels for the screen?
Sure. The first question, can it be accurately detected? I think that's well known at this point that marijuana can certainly be detected in oral fluid. It's been being done now for over 20 years. And so the answer is yes. The question is, how it relates to the cutoff and what are you really detecting at what time frames. And so, for many years, we talked a lot about the different levels of detection, and we've talked about, we showed these curves that relate to the amount of hours that you pick up drugs, and I think people have gotten a little bit accustomed now to that term window of detection, right? And how urine and oral fluid and hair and these different sample types differ, but within oral fluid there are differences related to the type of test that you do. And so, as you know, and hopefully some of our readers know, the everything kind of with oral fluid started many years ago with lab-based oral fluid testing as kind of the foundation. Although there were some rapid tests that came out very early on, they didn't work very well. But laboratory-based testing kind of was the foundation and where things got started, particularly with generating data that SAMHSA first became interested in and helped to get them interested in looking at the possibility of setting guidelines for oral fluid. And so the beauty of the laboratory-based test, of course, is just that you're doing it in a laboratory, and you can get down to fairly low levels of detection because you're running a laboratory-based test. And I'll give some specific numbers here. With a laboratory-based THC test, the typical cutoff level is about 3 or 4 nanograms per mil. Not to get super technical, but if you're looking at nanograms per mil in a urine assay, for example, and you're looking at nanograms per mil in an oral fluid assay, they're going to be very different. So don't, readers and listeners should not get confused between those numbers. If you look at oral fluid and urine, don't think that they're going to be the same. Oral fluid cutoffs are much lower because in order to get similar sort of detection rates in oral fluid and urine, you have to use lower cutoffs in oral fluid. It just has to do with the science, and it's beyond the subject of this particular podcast. But the cutoffs are much lower in oral fluid than in urine. So a 3 or 4 nanogram cutoff in oral fluid lab-based tests can easily be achieved. And that's going to give you a window of detection of typically somewhere between 24 and 36 hours. That means from the time someone smokes to the time that you're going to still be able to detect that THC in their sample is probably about a day, maybe 2 days. Now, if you use a rapid test, some people call it point of collection or an instant test, on-site test, whatever the case may be, those cutoffs are higher. So they can't get down to 3 or 4 nanograms per mil with an instant test, at least not as of today. Because that threshold or that cutoff is higher, that means that you're not going to detect the same amount of positives. You're going to miss some of those positives that a lab-based test will pick up. in the old days, that would be a no-no. That would be a negative, right? In today's world, with the legalization of marijuana, people wanting more like a workday type use. I only want to know what they did coming into work. I only want to know what they're doing on the job. A shorter window of detection is better. I don't want to know what they did this weekend or last night. So those rapid tests are more in the range of about 8 hours, maybe 10 hours. And those cutoffs are typically around 40 nanograms per mil, 40 or 50, which if you think about it is about 10 times higher than a lab-based test. Okay, so those are the basic differences between a lab-based and a point of collection or instant test. And it's important for listeners and for users of these tests to understand that. Because it is a very important difference between lab-based and instant tests.
Well, so let me ask you this then. Are you detecting marijuana accurately with both methods, lab-based and rapid?
Well, so accuracy is all a question of what you say you're going to detect, at what level you're detecting, and whether you're accurately detecting that. I can tell you that I'm detecting 4 nanograms per mil in a lab-based test, and if I'm accurately detecting 4 nanograms relative to a standard, let's say a lab-based confirmation methodology, and I pick up 4 nanograms and it compares very well to that reference method, then I'm accurately detecting 4. If I say I'm picking up 40 nanograms per mil and it's accurately detecting 40 nanograms per mil relative to a reference, then it's accurately detecting 40 nanograms per mil.
Okay.
I can't say that I can't tell you I'm picking up 4 nanograms, Bill, if my test really is 40, then I'm not accurate.
Yeah. But what about, like you mentioned, the window of detection, and it varies, of course, right? But in a previous episode, we talked about the fact that typically with oral fluid testing, you can detect marijuana use, any drug use, within minutes after the individual uses the drug, right? Because
Correct.
You're detecting the parent drug, and you're not waiting for the ability to be able to detect the metabolite of the drug. So help me understand how you're detecting drugs immediately, whether it's lab-based or rapid with oral fluid.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah, so oral fluid, THC gets into oral fluid extremely quickly, and it gets there for primarily because of the fact that THC is a very sticky compound. And drugs in general get into your oral fluid very quickly because they get into your bloodstream and they move through the blood into the oral fluid cavity. THC works kind of a little bit differently because it's such a sticky compound. It tends to just stick to everything. It sticks to the oral fluid cavity and it stays there, and it's very easy to detect over a period of time. But what you're really detecting is that parent THC. That means the psychoactive form of the drug, right? The form that gets you high. The metabolite really is not there. Like when you smoke marijuana and you wait hours, eventually it ends up in the urine as a breakdown product, a metabolite. The primary one being what we call carboxy THC, and it's really the form that you test for in urine. You won't find much of that in oral fluid. You can use the tests that are on the market all day, and you're really not going to find too much of that carboxy, which is one of the reasons that the federal guidelines and DOT eventually agreed that they're not going to look for carboxy THC. They're going to really zero in on parent at 4 nanograms. You can sometimes find the metabolite, but it's at such a low concentration that it makes it impractical for anybody to really call that a test. So that's just the nature of oral fluid. You're just not going to find much of it there. I hope that helps.
Oh yeah.
Answer your question.
So let's sort of spread out from there. With the legalization of marijuana, we see marijuana products in various forms, right? You've got smoked marijuana, marijuana cigarettes, so to speak. But you also have edibles and other ways to consume marijuana now that are legally available in these states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana. So how does oral fluid testing account for the way in which the marijuana was consumed, edibles versus smoke, for example?
It's mind-boggling, Bill. And so, the science behind cannabinoids is vast. I mean, there's literally hundreds of different cannabinoids that are present in from marijuana itself, from the marijuana plant, and so it's very complex. And like with many of the tests that we developed as immunoassay developers, when I was kind of back in the lab, you really go after the primary drug forms, the ones that are there in the most prevalent form, right? And that's why with oral fluid, we've always gone after the delta 9 THC. It's the parent THC. It's the one most prevalently present in the oral fluid sample. Just like in the urine sample, the metabolite, the carboxylic acid, the THC, COOH, if you will, is the one that's the primary metabolite, the one that's most prevalently there. When you're doing a cocaine assay, you're looking for cocaine and you're looking for the primary metabolite, the benzoylecgonine. So as assay developers, you're always kind of looking for, you develop antibodies that are the most prevalent ones that are going to give you the best chance of detecting whether someone potentially did the drug or not. And then, of course, the confirmation method, when you turn it over to the mass spec, either GC or LC mass spec, that gives you the true fingerprint, if you will, the absolute analysis for that particular drug, because that's a standard that is very, very specific for that drug. So the difficulty is that now you have a variety of different things that are being used and that show up in these different types of products. The different forms of THC, and now they're synthesizing things like Delta 8 and Delta 10 and all these different drugs. And so the antibodies that we use in the immunoassays get probably a little more technical than we want, but it's important to understand that the screens that are used do have a tendency, they're not 100% accurate or not 100% specific for a certain drug. They can tend to pick up other things. So in the case of an assay, a screen, you could pick up Delta 8, you could pick up some Delta 10. The primary thing, again, that the assay is trying to pick up is that Delta 9, the psychoactive form of the drug. And so if you get a positive, the most likely scenario is it comes up positive. Someone was, smoking, the eyes are red, smell like pot, acting funny. They probably smoked pot. But that's why it's so important for confirmation testing to be part of that algorithm when you're doing a screen, because when it goes to the lab, they're going to zero in on that particular drug that you're trying to confirm for. Getting back to your question about edibles, it's tricky because edibles are ingested; they're not smoked. You don't get that same level of contamination, if you will, or adherence that takes place in the oral fluid cavity. From some of the research I've read with edibles, and at least with oral fluid testing, they're more challenging to detect in a sample. They're typically, at a bit lower concentrations. And I think more research is really needed on that. They are detectable. I've seen plenty of studies that have shown people eating edibles and brownies and, some of the gummies and all those things that are out there. And let me tell you, some of these that I've seen being marketed are at pretty high concentrations. I mean, I've seen some of these chocolate squares and some of these gummies that are at 25, 50 milligrams worth of THC in one of those.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure from some of the studies I've seen, they've been accurately detected after someone eats one of those, that you're able to pick it up for a decent period of time. Low levels of those edibles are going to be a little more challenging to pick up, especially after, a day or even less time, 8 hours or what have you. I think they're just a little more challenging to detect.
Now I'm sorry, you mentioned Delta 8 and Delta 10.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of questions about Delta 8 in particular these days, but
yeah.
Is that detectable in oral fluid as well? And should employers be concerned about someone who has, who tests positive for Delta 8 or Delta 10?
I think we should all be concerned about Delta 8, Delta 10, all these variants, because They give a very similar psychoactive high to Delta 9. They may be a little weaker, but again, they still have the same effect. They're impairing substances, and the issue is that they're legal, right? So that in most states, at least as far as I'm aware, people can be using these, and they're not part of most people's current testing program. So even if they come up positive on a screen, they're going to go to a lab. And unless, an employer has said, I want to know whether there's Delta 8 in there, and they have that included in their program and their policy, and they've got it properly documented, how do you set your policy up for something that's illegal? Now we're dealing with, a whole new intricate sort of way that you have to deal with that sort of thing. So from what I understand, for the most part, people have not included Delta 8 in their testing algorithms or their policy and action that can be taken on an employee. But yet we have a substance that's being put onto a plant and can be smoked. I'm not so sure how much it's being put into edibles or things of that nature, but I do know from just going to fairs, and if you've been to any of these, lately, that we have one here in town that it's like a blues festival, and they have these tents that you go up to, and they're selling Delta 8 and these different compounds on buds that looks like pot, and
Wow.
so it's legal, and so it's concerning. And it's something, I know that the government's looking at that as a possibility of adding it and restricting it and making it illegal, but and certain tests will pick it up. Not all of them. It depends on the assay you're using. You can look at the package insert, and you can see most people are including that now in their package insert as to whether the assay picks it up or not. It's something you just have to be aware of.
Yeah. Well, excellent information again, Brian. Thank you very much. Anything you want to add before we close?
No, I don't think so, Bill.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Great information, a little bit more advanced with this episode. And so again, to our audience, if you're interested in knowing more about oral fluid testing, we have a whole series of podcast episodes of Currently Speaking about oral fluid testing, some very basic episodes dealing with some very basic issues, all the way to sort of your mid-level and more advanced topics. So if you're interested in learning more, check us out at currentconsultinggroup.com. You'll find a lot of good information there in our past podcast episodes. And with that, we'll bring this particular episode to a close. Thank you again for joining us. Look for us on all the major podcast platforms, and we'll see you in another episode on oral fluid testing. We have a whole bunch more that we're going to do. Thank you again.